provided that anyone making a video or audio recording of an open session of a meeting of a public body. They may transmit the meeting through those meetings, subject to reasonable requirements of the chair. Do you have any? Is that good enough for you? Where you are?
I think so.
All right, just wanted to show. Okay. And just as long as it doesn't interfere with the conduct of the meeting, and I don't believe it does. All right. Beginning the meeting, we need to inform that no person shall address the meeting of a public body without permission of the chair, and all persons shall be the chair to sign. No person shall disrupt. So that will just be the rules of the road. First order of business is obviously to take up the matter before us. The Broadband Institute. What I'd like to do is to start by going around the room and have them introduce themselves, starting from my left. Meredith Dixon will start with you.
I'm Meredith Dixon, MBI. Lisa Erlinson, MassTech.
Chris Andrews, MassTech.
Dave Shabno, MBI.
Bill Edmund, MBI.
Roger Cantor, MBI board member.
Matt Larkin, the Innovation Institute of MassTech.
Lindsay DeRoche, I'm from the Department of Telecom and Cable, here on behalf of the Commissioner.
Peter Larkin, the chair of the MBI.
Sean Cronin, Divisional Local Services, A&M Chesapeake.
Rick Oliveri, MBI board member.
Phil Hallahan, MassTech.
Megan Wilford, MassTech. Jennifer Soberman, MassTech.
Michael Baldino, MassTech.
Beth Ann Steiner, MassTech.
Brian Noyes, MassTech.
Chris Lynch, Matrix Design Group.
Mary Ellen Kennedy, Town of New Salem.
Where?
Town of New Salem, the Broadband Committee.
Great, thank you. Welcome everyone who's here. Just very briefly, we've got a slide deck and we have presentations to be made, and it's quickly just an overview of what we consider to be the subject matter of today's broadband. We have, obviously, since the last meeting that we have talked about it at length, is we have since done a May 10th governor announcement of a repivot and new strategic pathway for unserved towns. We moved away from the ubiquitous fiber to the home regional solution to a more flexible approach. And we have a number of different project models that we have available to towns and just to, like, and we also have a minimum project requirement, which before was project in the home 100% ubiquitous, and now it is 96% coverage and access to the FCC broadband speeds at 25.3, and also the need for long-term sustainability and approval by the DLS. So there is an opportunity for towns to go alone, and we are looking into developing a measure of regional consortiums as it relates to the operating abilities of those towns to cooperate with themselves. And so the MBI operating plan aligns with the implementation administrative approach. What I'd like to do is just start going through the slide presentation as they are presented. I know that I have this first order of business is the last mile initiative, and what I'd like to do is have Bill and Kennedy give us some data on readiness components. I think what I'm going to do though is I'm going to lead with Dave giving the current model. This is how it is presented. So, Michael, you're my.
I will hand this to Dave.
Oh, that's how we're going to do it. Okay. I can do that if it helps everybody. It's pretty good last time. You're on the back end. So, there we go.
I knew I should have been eating a sandwich when not.
Yeah. Like,
Let's start over again.
Let me do it.
You're not doing too flawless.
All right. Yeah, we touched fiscal moving until I.
Good? Yeah. All right, so on the readiness side, folks have seen this current model scorecard before. We introduced it in the last board meeting. Wanted to provide a quick update. As we've seen some additional progress as communities have come forward. At least, again, this is an initial assessment of the readiness as we work with these communities. We won't finalize these models until they finalize their readiness packages with us, which includes getting a DLS approval, an MBI letter of recommendation up to the board chair, Peter. So this is the initial take as we go into the communities and kind of where they're landing. So 30 towns have aligned to a model. We have 23 more towns pending. In the original count, these were part of the overall 53, so the 44 plus the partial cable towns, which is how we come up with 23 towns pending, which are really the predominantly the last mile towns. 2 towns selected a model of other, Washington and Rowe. Still to be defined what other means. We're working with them on that. 3 charter towns have already aligned with Model B. The majority of towns have said they would be interested in a multi-muni network, some type of regional network. So we continue to work regional collaboration options with the Baker administration and really defining, what it means either from a regional collaboration standpoint or these consortium model concepts. So if you look at the readiness status report, the standpoint of where we sit, the liaison, in Bill's case, he's completed probably a little bit more than 32. Him and I were talking this morning about that. So he's probably a little bit higher than that right now. So he's really in tight control. When we look at the end of July, Bill and I have talked, we have a program deadline of the towns finishing or submitting submitting the readiness request form on our website. Some towns, approximately 11, have not reached out to us, so we're reaching out to them. We're trying to get them engaged. We're trying to meet with them. It's more than likely that we will not complete, being that this is the end of July this week, that we will complete all 44 towns by the end of July, because some towns really they're kind of sitting out there in the periphery. They're not sure what they want to do, and it's going to take some additional coaxing to kind of get them out, go through a readiness process, have a discussion with us on what their options are. On the readiness kickoffs with the towns, we have 33 of 44 towns. Again, that's that delta of about 11 towns that I mentioned. So we're 75% of the goal, with a target of ending in August. Again, those outlier towns that I mentioned will likely push that target past the end of August. And then readiness completion, we have 1 of 44. That's Mount Washington, which we fast-tracked, which the board approved last month. We have 10 towns that have substantially completed readiness and received conditional DLS approval, which that means basically is we're waiting on green light letters from their bond council. A green light letter gives an indication to DLS and the MBI that these towns can borrow money, which is a very important aspect, right? So we're waiting on that predominantly across most of the communities. We have 2 green light letters, Ashfield and Mount Washington, actually 3, and Alfred are the 3 towns that have produced green light letters so far. And it's a little bit of call it a logjam, a process that all the communities, or at least a high 90 percentile of the communities that are out there working this, all have the same bond council. So he is inundated right now working through this process of qualifying these communities. 27 towns have completed first round meetings with their assigned MBI project manager. Poll survey mini bid we're evaluating. We did that mini bid that we again reported in last month's board meeting. The mini bid came back. What we're hoping to do is reduce the cost of the poll surveys by sending out this mini bid. We refined the scope of the RFP, and we were very successful at reducing that cost from $30 to $45 down to about $23 a poll. So we're evaluating the companies that responded, and we'll complete a recommendation up through Mass Tech on that, and then hopefully assign the first wave of towns that are ready to move forward, which is exiting readiness. As you know, as I report up, there's only one that's done that right now. We're ready to do a letter of recommendation, working through this letter of recommendation process in a memorandum of agreement. That's in review as a draft with our board chair right now, and really at a level, Ashfield is the only one that has exited readiness, beyond Mount Washington, which was a different case, to move forward under an MBI managed project. So we have approximately 16 towns that may have to take a revote. This is an issue with the warrant articles that went out with the town meetings. Could be, as long as a year ago, where they had spelled out in their warrant articles that they wanted to join a cooperative or build a regional network. With the reset, and as I said on the other slide, with a lot of towns looking to build their own network, Sean and I are working with Rick Manley, the bond counsel, to determine if these things have to be amended. As of email yesterday, he was thinking that it might not have to be, so we're still kind of working through that. But it is an issue that could be of contention, that we want to get something out to these communities so that they can potentially call a special town meeting in the fall and get these things amended accordingly. So more to come on that. I'll turn this over to Bill now so he can give kind of an essence of what's happening out there, what he's hearing from the liaison standpoint.
Thank you, David. A few comments just off the top. I'm somewhere north of 35 town halls that I've been into since the second half of May. I was with Chesterfield on Monday night and Terringham on Monday during the day. These, as I've tried to express before to the board, these meetings are led by the designee and the select board. There's often, it can range from anything from 4 people to 40 people in the room, and it can range for anything from 15 minutes to 2 hours in length. So the experience is quite different and unique in each town. We hear a lot of the same themes, but it is quite unique, and we need to be responsive. We are responsive in those situations to the types of questions coming from that town. And then part of my role is to come back to Peter and the team to ascertain sort of our perspectives, our views, answer questions, troubleshoot things, and also I forecast for them or foreshadow for them what readiness is like. And I think that's quite helpful, because by the time they actually get to the stage of readiness process, the first meeting, they understand that it's not a test, it's a collaborative and cooperative exercise. And generally, by and large, I have to say that the feedback I get that comes directly to me after initial readiness meeting with the engineers is very positive feedback. I get with some regularity these positive responses. I think that one thing that makes clear to me is that our engineers have to adapt to and use the one size does not fit all. They have to adapt in the situation through readiness, and to sort of reinforce a point that David has made. Some folks are raring and ready to go. Alford is a town like that. And some folks are a little reluctant and hesitant because the prospect of spending a great deal of town money is just a little much at this moment, and they need that close relationship with the MBI engineer to sort of walk themselves to that level of comfort. So it will be all over the map. As I say when I'm out on the road, it's going to be a patchwork quilt of solutions, and time is going to vary depending on the choices and preferences of each town. I did want a couple of specific examples, and then I'll stop. We have a great team in Shutesbury that I sat down with again. It's been a little while since I've met Shutesbury. I sat down with them on Friday in Greenfield, and we talked about what they're doing. They feel very pleased and confident in the direction they're heading, which is a fiber to the home kind of project. They're talking to towns around and that they know and have relationships with. They're very cooperative in that. They very much value John Fury, the MBI engineer. They very much value that relationship. And they are really looking forward to this fall, getting into the pole survey, heading into design, and working with their neighbors, Leverett, Wendell, and other towns, not necessarily immediately adjacent, to be in a collaborative effort, especially on the operating side once they've completed construction. Had a bit of Cornell and I were in Middlefield the other night for 2.5 hours. Got out of Middlefield about 9:45 the other night. It was a very important public meeting that people could come in and talk about the pilot project that we've awarded. And the Middlefield Select Board Chair specifically asked us to come out so that we could help demystify this pilot project. And so it was a wide open Q&A session in Middlefield in which, and the views and the concerns about it were really wide-ranging. They have a really good local team, and the select board chair is tied into all that. But nonetheless, for some people, even after a long period of effort on behalf of the on the part of the Middlefield team, there were people in town who needed to get answers, wanted answers to their concerns about what this project is. And as you know, those folks who touched the concept of using wireless throws another sort of wrinkle into this in terms of the confidence or lack thereof of wireless being a solution in the topography of Western Mass, which we're all sort of deeply familiar with over the years. So Middlefield is an important pilot for us in terms of looking at those issues. Let's see. And then I'll wrap up I'll say a word about Terringham, which was a really wonderful conversation the other day. Terringham is part of a kind of a 5-town group that includes Marlborough and Monterey and Sandusfield. This 5-town group that are just collaborating in this loose affiliation as they go through readiness. And Terringham is not quite in readiness; they're getting ready for readiness. I can't remember the date of it, but they're getting ready for that. And Terringham really is saying we would really like to count on MBI's guidance because we think there are multiple options for us going forward. You know, maybe with the rebuilding of the Time Warner network by Charter, maybe there's a cable option. Maybe there's an option with Mid Hudson and a private partner there. Maybe Frontier will be interested in coming up from New Marlborough. So just remember that they're part of a 5-town group that's staying close together in terms of moving forward. So I think those are some examples of specific ones that I wanted to call people's attention to. Questions?
Just a comment on the Shutesbury and Wendell line there. I know it was mentioned earlier about the potential for having to go back to town meeting for bond authorizations, but the debt exclusion, we're not going to require any community to go back and have a revote for the debt exclusion. They may want to choose to do so on their own, but our legal folks at Local Services don't believe that they have to go back and revote for political, local political reasons they want to. They can do so, but we're not going to require them.
Just a follow-up on that, John. Wasn't there an issue with Shutesbury that Rick brought up around 2.5 override language that was put into the debt exclusion?
I got to check that one, but I thought that we were okay with all the language that went in, but I'll double check.
You questioned that one in particular. That's why I made that.
I'll use that point to make an observation from the field about the revoting issue. I think that regardless of what the recommendation is from the experts about revoting, regardless of what the recommendation is, some towns may decide to revote because it would provide them an opportunity to bring their community up to current status on what they're doing. So they think that they would have a very important and good story to tell, and so that some of them are thinking that is an opportunity. So, any questions?
Yeah. Bill touched on the Middlefield pilot and of course the Mount Washington. Anything else, we've advanced the money. There are obviously always some bump in the road, and resolving the Middlefield issue locally is really on their desk. The selectmen are making some determinations. Right now, we've got a little lead time on the fiber that they would like to get Mount Washington. That's nothing new. Just what happened like that.
Yeah, we've talked to a lot of the vendors regarding this lead time issue. Particularly, the lead vendor on the fiber side is Corning. That Mount Washington wanted to use Corning fiber. They had kind of exhausted their manufacturing stock that they had based on Google fiber. But we actually talked to Corning this week, reached out to them and confirmed that they're catching up. So that problem should be nullified. We're doing some other things with Mount Washington to help them in that situation. But I also get that Google fiber is on hold, so that actually can help us as we move forward with our center. So.
All right, I'd like to talk a little bit about the private partnerships, public-private partnerships that we have underway. Bill Halloran has been doing some work with us on the Frontier communications, but we're also in conversation reaching out through the governor's office. Verizon, obviously, having conversations with Charter Communication, and expand their services beyond the agreements that we are negotiating as we speak.
Sure. The New Marlboro situation is really interesting. It could have significant implications for the whole broadband issue in Western Mass. New Marlboro is a town of 1,000 residences, houses. They put out an RFI a few months ago, and they said, well, look, we've got a problem. Come up with some ideas on how it might fix it for us. One of the companies that came forward, Frontier, came up with an idea that, frankly, the town is taken with, and I think so are we, at least in the elements of it that are around today. And that is what Frontier has said to New Marlboro is, if you, the town, would be willing to make a binding commitment to us over time to make a payment on behalf of each house, meaning take the uptake risk off the table. We, Frontier, would be willing to build out a fiber network in the town, which we, Frontier, would own and at our expense and maintain, and hook up every house in town and deliver a baseline level of service at no additional cost to the homeowner. And the numbers that they're throwing around are still preliminary, and we probably shouldn't be talking about them here, but they're interesting numbers. And to a certain extent, it depends on the ability of the town to do one of two things: either issue bonds and take the proceeds from those bonds and make a payment to a private party for these services on behalf of their residents, or make a binding long-term commitment over time. The ordinary course, a municipality that makes a commitment over time, beyond the first year, the commitment is subject to appropriation. And since they control the appropriation, what it means is I'm making a long-term commitment as long as I want to continue making a long-term commitment. And which is fine for a lot of goods and services, because if I'm buying Tootsie Roll Pops and I decide I'm not going to pay for any more Tootsie Roll Pops, the seller simply doesn't deliver any more Tootsie Roll Pops. It doesn't work as well in a situation where someone, as proposed by Frontier, is going to make a major capital investment in reliance on that promise. But there is a way that, with legislative changes, that the town could do either the upfront payment or the regular payment over time. As a practical matter, that would and should require some kind of a home rule petition, which is probably not a bad idea for any number of reasons. The town asked whether or not they could do this without regard to a competitive process, and we told them no. That didn't appear to us that they would have been exempt from 30B as an MLP. It wasn't clear necessarily after talking with the DTC that they were an MLP. And furthermore, for a contract of this magnitude over this period of time, we've been working very closely with Governor's Legal on this, and it just didn't seem appropriate to do anything without a bidding process. So where we are right now in preliminary discussions with both New Marlboro and Frontier, but this may be a new model that towns could consider that may result in a lower capital cost to the town and to the state, a faster construction schedule, and significantly reduced operating risk over time. Not without risks itself, because the town, under this scenario, under this proposal, would be asked to essentially pick up 100% of the baseline uptake risk for the town. Right? So but it's a really interesting concept. Now, we also have a bit of an issue, which we'll talk about more tomorrow. We happen to have the chairman of Frontier on our board of directors. So we have to make sure that she's not involved in any of these discussions, which we've already had a preliminary conversation. She got no problem with that, believe me. She hadn't heard about this. So, Lindsay, do you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think Frontier is a large communication company that has been recently buying up former Verizon territories. They most recently bought Connecticut and California. They are providing a service which is roughly comparable to Verizon's Fios service, so you'll have a phone, cable, and internet package that will be marketed to customers. And there's certainly a large and well-developed corporate entity that's used to providing these types of services. So I think there's no questions of capability.
None. And again, this would all have to be done through a competitive process as proposed under Chapter 30B of the general laws. And we're going to be meeting with both separately, New Marlboro and Frontier. And this could be something where the administration and Peter could talk to other similarly situated companies about, would you be interested in this kind of an arrangement? The notion of long-term municipal contracts is binding contracts is rare. It's been done, but, and Sean, you would know more about this than I, but it's been done in the solid waste area. Sometimes it didn't work out as well as it could have. There's more risk in that area, I think, than there is in this one. But it's a very interesting concept. I think we're all excited about the concept. Whether it pans out.
Conversations are ongoing. Other private partnerships, public-private partnerships, obviously the charter communications, and we've reached an agreement in principle, working out the grant agreement language. There's a notice on the street right now, posted as a grant to charter, that has a deadline of August 5th. I expect that to occur, and we've also reached out to the towns that will be affected most greatly, Hinsdale, Waynesboro, and West Stockbridge, with their agreement to be included in that agreement is pending. So we're making progress there. Moving to other topics, we've got obviously a federal advocacy effort underway. We're engaging federal delegation. This is Congressman Neal and Congressman McGovern, obviously our Senators Warren and Markey, to help us in securing a position for Massachusetts in a favorable way of the Cap 2 funding cycle. Their comments were received, and there were joint comments that MBI and ETC put forward. There also have made efforts to encourage companies to participate. Obviously, Verizon, Comcast, Charter, Frontier, and others to see whether there's an opportunity for them to pick up cap funding in certain unserved communities we've listed. We're also looking for funding alternatives from USDA, definition of utilizing allowing loans for broadband, and those are advocacies that are being undertaken by the Congressman right now. I just mentioned earlier we made joint comments to cap to auction those. It's told to me, and we might have a difference within here in this regard, but my understanding is that the FCC is moving as fast as they can to make sure that this sort of is executed, whether the auction takes place this year with their intent. It's sort of the Chairman Wheeler's legacy piece, trying to move this as quickly as we can. Some of the things, the issues that would streamline, we talk about contesting the census blocks, really not allowed because they're actually on an expedited effort to try to get CAF 2 funding out to the street and help unserved communities not only here but across the country. So I'm kind of optimistic that they're engaged very seriously in that regard. We've also obviously the broadband extension program with Comcast, Hardwick and Montague select boards opted to participate in the program. You guys proceeding with that grant agreement. We have language that is just going back back and forth on behalf of all the 9 towns. We reached, agreement on most of on the major terms. It's really sort of the governor's legal offices in dealing in that regard. So the last step of the assurances in that regard. That is sort of a quick overview of what we're doing. Clearly, what I wanted to do is just again 40,000 view of this and move to the budget itself. We talked a little bit about this already. Obviously, the changes that are taken. It's a new pathway for this administration to help towns find broadband services. It's a change from the ubiquitous fiber to the home regional solution. We're also, we've also suggested 5 models, but others will become apparent as we're meeting with providers that can bring forth broadband services to the communities in different ways. Our project requirements is a 96% coverage at a speed of 25.3. And long-term sustainability in that regard, approval by the DLS for the ability of the town to support their commitments. We also allow the towns to go along with we committed to the construction allocation. And as we remember this, and I think I want to put it on the table here, as we're revisiting our last mile policy. Remember that the fiber to the home ubiquitous was $110 million, $109 million, $108 million proposal that at the end of the day, as we have discovered that it didn't meet everyone's needs appropriately, but it was still a proposal that was made by the state. We were going to fulfill the commitment of the construction allocation, which was $22 million. Because the bar has been lowered in part in terms of the coverage to 96 from 100, we still are going to commit to the construction allocation. We also want to help communities expedite their efforts going forward, and we're willing to look at communities on the pulse surveys, which is sort of the initial readiness step we need to take. We're looking into, there's another category of money that we call the professional services. There's been some concern about the professional services. There's, given the fact that we did a pilot for Leverett, as that pilot was extended to those communities, it was completely understood that was put forth before policies were implemented, and that was simply designed as a one-off opportunity to help the county, who was really ahead of even the MBI. We also said that by virtue of making any award to Leverett, it's not a precedent. It's not one that one can go then, therefore, other towns would say, well, that's what we would like to have in our town. At the end of the day, the operating budget of the Mass Broadband Institute to serve the needs of many of these towns is embedded in the professional services that we have all laid out and walk through that budget document. We just want to make people understanding that there's a sense that it's the town's money, and saying, listen, it's the money set aside to bring broadband services. And as we want to give certainty to communities as best we can. The construction allocation is very clearly one that we're not going to shrink, even though we shrunk the standard. Okay? And at the very same time, the professional services, we're willing to back into that for what we consider to be full surveys. To a competitive bid has brought the price down from what was anticipated even in our budget documents. You'll see now it's about $30 down to $25 to $23. Okay? It costs less, which means our budget is not. So we're looking at this as we're moving forward with the change in our strategy and our operating plan. We understand that the monies themselves, and if we can provide those services to the communities for less, we're not going to make communities pay more. Please understand that isn't the intent. The intent is to provide the service as efficiently and economically as we can. So I just wanted you to know that we're struggling with the last mile financial model, where the last mile policy, we want to have clarification. We will post that clarification. We will share it with the members of the board before we do. All right, in consideration, we put a first draft up at the last meeting. We're doing a little bit more wordsmithing around that in consultation with others, and we will share that with the members before we move forward and put that in a public way. So we want you to know it's a struggle that we're faced with, and we want to give clarity to the communities and as we go forward. So that's sort of the overview. The next part is the areas of focus that we'll be working on. Obviously, these are the monies that will we're spending on. I know Chris Andrews is going to sort of take us through this, but all of these are appropriate issues that are still before us. We still have the broadband extension program that we manage going on the out years. The mass broadband 123 network, the middle mile is still a responsibility of the MBI. We're trying to transition the Mass Vets Advisors website over to the DBS, services, and obviously we have some litigation that still remains in front of us that we're optimistic would be a favorable outcome. But again, you never know until it's the day is coming. It's still in front of us. So I think that brings us to the conclusion of what we call the sort of an overview. What I'd like to do is have Chris Andrews kind of walk through the numbers themselves, if you would. Is this on another, Michael, is this on another drive?
While Mike's putting that up on the screen, the MBI board obviously is just focused on MBI issues, but while we're here on this campus, I'll take 2 minutes to tell you the context within which MBI operates, which is it's one of 3 institutes that are housed within the Mass Tech Collaborative. The legislature has created these 3 different institutes for 3 different purposes. MBI is obvious to this board. We also do the John Adams Innovation Institute that Patrick runs, which is an economic development in the innovation economy space. And we have the Massachusetts Electronic Health Record Institute, MBI, to help disseminate electronic health records to the economy and the information that's gathered. And we do one other thing, and just because in case you're curious what this huge building is behind you, that's a chip fabrication facility that was built by Mass Tech about 20-25 years ago, at a time when the mini computer industry was dominant in Massachusetts. We were training people to get into that industry, and came up with a training facility here at about the same time that industry went west to and PC. So we were lucky, and so it was a little ahead of and behind its time at the same time. And we were lucky enough to find a Massachusetts company, Copen Corporation, that needed a facility like that. And we've entered into a long-term lease with them, and they've got 2 or 3 shifts a day over there as one of the last chip makers in Massachusetts on this campus. So it's a little example of all the different things we do here. We're going to be talking about the MBI budget, which is the numbers that flow out of the plan that Peter was talking about. And that plan flows from the strategy and the reset that we've done with the administration over the last few months. So I think we're in a position after all those discussions to have gone from a revised strategy to plan and now to budget. And the context is that when the executive committee of the Mass Tech Board met last month, we were not in a position to ask for approval of the MBI budget. We were still working with the administration on the contours of that budget. So we're going tomorrow to the Mass Tech Board. If this committee is going to be approving the budget and the plan, we'll go and ask the Mass Tech Board for its approval as well tomorrow. And then we'll have a consolidated plan for the corporation. And during the last month in particular, we worked very closely with Carolyn Kirk from EOHED, who represents the administration's input on this and interest in the plan. And in the last week or so, I think she's indicated that she feels very happy with the way it's come out. I think she's talked to A&F about the funding elements of it, and A&F has signed off on the funding elements of it. And so today we're going to go through more of the details of the plan and get this committee's input. And so the budget, there are a lot of budget materials in there that gets into a budget narrative that explains what some of the premises are. It gets into some of the different analyses that flow from it. But this is kind of the overview of the budget. And the way we think about MBI is as a series of programs. Last Mile is one Peter and Dave and Bill just spent most of the time talking about, and that's the one we'll get into in some detail, and where there's the most uncertainty as to what the numbers are, because it's still the readiness assessments are still coming in, and how different towns want to interact with us will influence how the financials go over time. The broadband extensions, that's the the cable extension program, that's a fairly straightforward budget. The only variable is how fast the Comcast can build out, and therefore how fast they are reimbursed for that build out. So we'd assume $2 million this year, but that's really as much in their control as it is in ours. I'm going to get into the MBI ops. That's the middle mile network. I'm going to spend a little time on that before getting back to last mile broadband extensions, because it's something we don't talk about very often. But it's a huge asset. It's a $90 million asset. It's one we are going to run on behalf of the Commonwealth for years, and it's just something we ought to understand as a board, check in on from time to time. The G4S dispute, we just put that a separate category because it's litigation, and it's like all litigation is variable. We try to budget for it as best we can, but and we'll get into that in a little bit as well. MBI General is just everything that isn't in one of those buckets. So time spent at this meeting, or employee reviews, or all the different things where you're not actively working on a project, is accounted for in MBI General. So the first thing I want to drill into is this the network. And there are two businesses really associated with the network. One is the operation of the network itself. We've contracted that out to Axia Net Media. They're a Canadian company based in Calgary under a 10 or 12-year contract, kind of how you count, where we negotiated what in retrospect turns out to be the deal of the century, in a sense that at the time the trade-off was how much upside do we want to keep for the Commonwealth versus how much downside do we want to protect ourselves against. And we chose protecting against the downside. We went way on that end of the spectrum because we entered this deal way before we knew what the network would even be, much less could it be operated successfully, profitably, and all that. So in our deal with Axia, they get to keep all of the revenues in the first instance, and I'll show you why there's a qualification of that statement, and they have to pay all of the expenses of running the network. They, on a strategic basis, decided to take that risk. They were trying to get into the United States as a business. This is going to be their beachhead to get in, create a U.S. business. They thought they could expand into New Hampshire and New York, and they were willing to operate at a loss or take the risk of operating at a loss for that strategic good. They've since decided on a different business plan, and this is now just a standalone network for them. And after 2 or 3 years, you can see that they're getting about $3 million of revenue from the ISPs and others who hook into the network. But they have a series of expenses they have to pay that add up to $4.6 million. And so they're losing currently about $1.5 million a year. They think they can break even in the next 18 to 36 months. They see themselves continuing to add customers to the network and building it out. And we believe that. They're doing a good job with the network operations. Of those amounts, they have their own operating expenses of a couple $2 million. They have to pay all of the fees that we're contractually obligated to pay as the owner of the network to third parties. For example, the pole attachment fees we pay to the utilities year after year. And they have to pay Mass Tech certain amounts each year. And they pay for 2 funds that are intended to protect us over the long term. One is what's called a capital equipment refresh fund. We were worried that as a network operator in the short term, 10 or 12 years, they wouldn't invest in the network when the equipment needed to be upgraded. So we negotiated with them a $400,000 a year payment into a network refresh fund that we have rights. If they don't, just as a matter of market forces, and continue to invest in the network, we can force that to happen. We can make them upgrade the network using these funds. And at the end of a lifetime of a network, the utilities can ask us to take down the network. That's expensive. So we're getting a decommissioning payment from them that we put into a reserve to make sure that that if the utilities ever exercise that right, we're not left out in the cold. Two other payments are intended to cover our operating expenses and pay for anything associated with the network that is just unforeseen. Like if Axie comes to us and we want to renegotiate over a longer term, we hope that this network is profitable enough to allow us to have a little bit of funding for that to happen. One is called the network oversight fee. That's a fixed amount they have to pay us each year. It escalates by a few percent a year. It's currently about $580,000. And then we get a piece of the action every time they enter into a dark fiber deal. Instead of selling, their customary model is to sell lit services, services like we all buy residentially. But they can also sell dark fiber, that is exclusive access to a strand of fiber to people who want throughput from territory to territory. We get 50% of each of those sales. And they've just done a big deal with Charter, for example, and so we're starting to see some real money come out of that. So the Axia business is losing money right now. They hope to break even. Mass Tech, because of the way we structured the agreement, has about $480,000 this year net of our operating costs. And we'll see why that's important as we go through this. But any questions on the network while we're here? So the other story is just worth a minute taking because we talk about it as just how does the litigation going, but just to talk about it in the context of the budget, we've had to model a few different scenarios. This is still actively being processed. We won a huge win in March when the court agreed with us that G4S had engaged in fraud that was so material that they shouldn't be allowed to pursue their damages claims against us. And the court threw their claims out of court. They're going to appeal that. We'll have to defend against that appeal. We are going after them for damages because they delayed the network being built, and it caused us to spend a lot of money on attorney's fees. And we think both of those entitle us to compensation, and we're going to be fighting that in court. You'd think there should be a settlement here somewhere. They are not willing to talk about settlement, even though at every stage of the way the court has said, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. So if a settlement could be entered into, it's a whole different ballgame in terms of how much attorney's fees we have to put aside and what the outcome will be. Any questions on G4S? So really what I want to do is kind of get into what constitutes the $20 million of expenses that we're spending in FY17. And most of that is in last mile and broadband extension. So and what I've done is try to make it a little more digestible, is just set them out from the most amount to the least amount so you get a sense of what the big programs are, the big sets of expenditures are. First of all, realize that $6 million of the $20 million is a non-cash depreciation expense. We depreciate the $90 million network over periods of time, and that's what that is. So we don't have to fund that with new funding, but it's an expense that goes through the P&L. Some of our bigger expenses are, all the bigger expenses are associated with the last mile or the broadband extension program. And we plan to do, as Peter pointed out in the operating plan, these construction grants. We have a bunch of candidates in mind. We're estimating 4 to 7 towns. But again, that's a function of how quickly towns can move and how much money they need, which towns come in when. So this is a guesstimate, not a bad one, I think. We also intend to sign up with a design engineer in the next couple months. And we won't know until we know the scope of the services we're asking them to do, which we'll know after the readiness assessments. But we put a placeholder in of an $8.5 million design engineering contract that we'd be entering into on behalf of at least 20 towns, of which we're assuming the $2 million will be spent in FY17. The Comcast amount and charter amounts we talked about. The make-ready work, that's the work associated with getting permissions from the utility owners to put the cables up on the poles and whether those poles are ready to take those cables. That's a huge expense. It was in the middle mile network, it is in the last mile network. We're sharing that expense with the towns. Our share of it, we're assuming is going to be $1.5 million this year, and we're assuming that we're working with up to 10 towns this year to initiate the make-ready. We've got our staffing costs, litigation we've talked about, the full survey is what Peter talked about. We hope to come in under that number if it can be $23, $25 versus $30, so not materially under, but under. And so that ties to the $20 million number we see on the P&L. What I now want to show you is how that's funded, because we don't need $20 million worth of funding. We need $20 million minus the non-cash depreciation plus new capital expenditures, plus we're using some of the bond funds to pay EOHED, where Peter and Bill are employed, will be employed. So we need $14.2 million of funding to execute this plan with all its assumptions. Questions? I'm going to get into how that's funded, but I want to, if there's questions along the way, let me know. So, in discussions with HED and ANF capped the amount we'd be eligible to receive this year at $10.4 million of bond funds. So most of that $14 million is coming from the $50 million bond fund. To make up the difference, we're using the last bit of money we have left over from the original bond funds with which we built the middle mile network. The $1 million the legislature gave us when MBI was created to be used as this kind of emergency or just the money you need for whatever, and this is for whatever. We are taking the profits from the network last year, $231,000, and applying them towards this year's plan. And all the expenses of the MBI network are part of the $14 million that need to be funded. So we're showing that the $780,000 that comes to us is being used to help cover those expenses. And the last slice is a portion of the liquidated damages that we held back from G4S because they were late in delivering the network. We held back $4 million. They've sued to recover those. Their claims against us have been thrown out of court, but they're appealing. So we hope those monies are going to be available because they'll lose the appeal. We're 90% plus confident, but that's not a certainty at this point. And so the last slide is just, again, the budget. We've gotten into the big expense items, some of the areas that we talked about less than others. Most of the assumptions are in the materials that underlie it, were in Peter's presentation. And this is what we're asking you to approve.
To segue into why we're here, right? Is this operating plan and budget are still under development last month. Now we're moving forward with a motion. A motion that I would want to put on the table. I would ask to move a motion. I'd like to move it out for a second. Motion, I'll read a motion. Have a second for a motion. Second. The motion is the Board of Directors of the Massachusetts Broadband Institute does hereby approve the fiscal year 2017 operating plan and budget for the institute. as presented and does hereby recommend that the Executive Committee of the Board of Directors of the Massachusetts Technology Park Corporation, MassTech, take final action to approve the plan as part of MassTech's fiscal year 2017 consolidated budget. The plan is approved in full satisfaction with the requirements of subsection G of section 6B of chapter 40J of the Massachusetts General Laws. The board, subject to final review and approval of the plan by the Executive Committee of the MassTech Board of Directors, hereby authorizes the chair to submit the plan for final approval to the Secretary of Housing and Economic Development and the Secretary of Administration and Finance as required by said subsection. So this motion has been made, it has been seconded. Are there any other questions, comments?
Peter, I just got a couple things. One, I know that this is going to work on, but if there's any possible way in the future that we can get information delivered to us sooner than 5 days before meeting, that'd be very helpful.
2 weeks.
Number two, is there any clarity at all on the FY18 budget? As this stuff gets built out, I'm sure some of the costs are going to come down for further out years, one would hope. But there's going to be a $2.7 million hole to fill unless the budget comes down for next year because some of these funding sources are not going to be available next year.
So we've got a plan, like the program plan, that's the last page of these budget materials, where we've thrown in our best estimates of how each, and it's not the slideshow, but in the one called, it was delivered to the last page of that, and it tries to show by program, by year, and by funding source how this whole thing works. So we have it. What we don't know is how much ANF would say is available to us next year. The hope is that as they get more and more comfortable with the direction and the plan, that they will fund up to the $50 million what is needed to fund to execute on the plan. Because otherwise, we just have to scale down the plan.
We've been asked by the administration to sort of move forward these towns. Obviously, the make-ready process is important. Given the construction year going forward, the whole survey, you can sort of see what that would look like without moving down that road. So we've been front-loading, if you will, this project, moving as quickly as we can. And this remains out there for contract services. So, and we do, and as we've had conversation with HED and even ANF, and we've said to them, you know, as we're expediting the payout, all right, you understand that we may be less money available to operate. It may be a good thing if we've got broadband services out there on the street, but that's the intention. Okay? But in the out years, we may need to come back to you for support, including the full 44 town network. They've understood that that being said, we're going forward with the years and the monies we have available right now.
The only other question I had was in here on the veteran service, the veterans website, the vets portal, and you alluded to it earlier in the comments.
Yes.
What's the timeline on transitioning that?
Megan, at least.
We're expecting that we have a 90-day window. We do have an executed agreement with the State Department of Veteran Services to make the transfer, which was signed about a week and a half ago. And I believe that allows for a 90-day transition period to allow this activity.
So that's fairly imminent.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Just one other question too. Is there any time frame that we think that the contract dispute will be resolved? Is it?
I think there is a chance it could be within this fiscal year, towards the end, if it all plays out. But I can imagine it being 2 years too, depending on appellate court timing and stuff like that.
Just looking ahead at that last sheet, there's a significant amount of funding sources coming from the remaining $4 million if it goes our way, obviously.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Rick, and it's the biggest unknown, you know. Appellate court throws it out for whatever reason, and somehow we're back in as a defendant. One thing that goes our way, including on the damages, we actually get money that's not modeled here yet. So the spectrum is wide.
This is something to bear in mind for these towns that are going to be doing this on their own. I mean, we have the resources to fight these battles against these characters. Good luck.
Looking at that multi-year projection, there's the 714,017 from network operations, and then it's zero going out for source of funds. Why is there nothing going forward?
Well, the hope is that the profits from the network stay with the network business to make that as robust as it can be and to be as protected as can be, especially during the transition from Axia to the next operator. We need it this year to plug gaps, and if we need it next year to plug gaps, we have to look at it and see what the best use is. But it would be too bad if the network kind of gets stranded from a financial perspective for too long, because there will be long-term needs to have some funding source, some available funds.
So is the goal of that network to be an enterprise fund? Somewhat self-sufficient?
Pretty much, yeah. But having, not being stuck, let's say we had to, at the end of the term with Axia, I'm not sure anybody would come in on these terms. We want to pay somebody to take it. We're operating at a loss ourselves, so we think it's prudent to not have zero in the asset column for that enterprise.
So ultimately, we'd be subsidizing this network.
It's way too early. I mean, I don't know. This could turn into a really robust profit maker in one scenario, or it could be running along like this in another scenario. So it's really early to, Dave, I don't know. Dave's got much more experience in the industry than I, so I don't know if you've ever.
So we've seen some, Chris alluded to, Axia on the operational side. They're doing a good job on the operational side. And about a year ago, they hired a new VP of carrier sales. And he's been our single point of contact. This gentleman comes with industry experience, and he's brought some sizable deals. He brought the charter deal. Certainly they needed us at some levels, and they were seeking us out. But that's how this business works. They're looking at some things to expand around E911. They're talking to wireless carriers about bringing fiber to towers. So there are opportunities out there. We're at an adoption rate of about 46% of the community anchor institutions that we installed originally with the network. And typically in the business, when you see that higher level of it, that's a high level of adoption rate for a carrier to go into a marketplace. So again, in my experience working nationwide carriers, when we got to 25%, we would pull everybody out of the territory. And we would go to a new territory to try to build out that territory. Western Mass is completely different. You have to look at what's available for businesses out there. There's not a lot of opportunity to expand from that perspective. We can expand in the school environment, but last mile is an opportunity for us, at least in these 44 communities, to bring new revenue on as well. So it really is unknown at some level, as Chris said.
What about expanding in the communities that already have cable? That was one of the things that they brought up at the regional planning commission meeting. Are there opportunities here for other communities that are already lit up but not fully to plug in and that be a revenue generator for the middle mile?
There are. Building out fiber extensions is very expensive. So when you look at the return on investment on these deals, and we work with Axia as they're brought forward, it's hard to, when we project out for profitability on those, it takes anywhere from 3 to 5 years. And in the business, you want it in 24 months. You got to get the profitability as quickly as possible, so that you're making something on that extension. So that's one of the issues, is whether the state subsidizes those extensions, and currently we don't have a budget for that. We talked about those things, but there is no budget. So we take them on a case-by-case basis.
So if the community comes to you and says, we want to build out that network and we're willing to pay for it, you have a plan in place for them to plug in, pay for it, and then get the revenue back on the...
Absolutely. We haven't seen a lot of those that they say they're willing to pay for.
How much are you advertising that to the communities?
I wouldn't say we're advertising it. The feet in the street, the people that sell our network, It's not Axia. Axia deals with the large carriers. They deal with Charter, they deal with Verizon. They also we have 14 connection agreements signed with ISPs, regional internet service providers. The largest one is Windstream, which is a national one. Those are our feet in the street. It's up for those guys to go and talk to these communities and say, is there something that we can sell you? Or the communities to go to approach their ISP and say, look, we want to expand. We have this municipal network where 2 of our buildings are connected. We want to connect the third. They would work through that ISP, which would get a quote from Axia to build the physical extension. That's kind of how it works. So we don't have necessarily a sales campaign out there. We allow the enterprise, the businesses, the ISPs to go seek out that business. And certainly as things come to us, so if the towns come to us, then we're right on it. I'll contact somebody or I'll deal with somebody in the town, I'll talk with them, I'll get Axia involved, and we'll make sure we work through it. So if you know of anybody.
I'm just thinking it might not be a bad idea to have someone develop some sort of just cheat sheet to distribute to towns and say, if you're looking to build out, this is who your contact, this is what's available.
Yeah. I see some merit in that. Yeah. You can look at that.
Glad you brought that up. I was reminded of an email we received the other day from the town. The individual was looking at developing an internet hotel. Well, he was concerned about the prices that the town has to pay. It's subject to negotiation. He said, but his argument at the time when he presented it was, didn't the state and federal government provide the money to build a middle mile? Absolutely. I said, but there's an operating cost associated with that as well. And I think that's a forgotten part of it. But we didn't say to them that we'll help assist you with walking through to the partners and bring that idea alive.
It seems like this is already built for the towns to have to go and figure it out on their own. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Now, there's going to be nuances that they have to figure out on their own, but
yeah,
the roadmap should be there for them.
Yeah, I mean, I clearly, I hear what you're saying, and I think we had a strong presence in all those communities when we built the Middle Mile Network. And we had a community outreach team that's kind of still in existence within MBI, carrying forward on the last mile. So at some level, right now, our heaviest line of communications is through Bill. But really those are the unserved communities. So the served, as you're saying, the ones that we already have built, we probably need to do a little bit more, particular campaigning with those folks and let them know what's available. So we can take a look at that.
Thank you.
Bill?
So in some instances, in economic development circles, I've been encouraging regional planners and economic development professionals that for companies for whom connecting to 123 might make the difference in terms of moving their customers to better services. So if you think of a firm that provides cloud services to a group of customers, it may be the case that building into 123 might make some sense. It's often the case that and David alluded to this, that often the case that initial expense of $10,000 to build the lateral connection is often daunting. But I think increasingly, that's something that we have to be able to talk about in the field, refer people as you're suggesting. So I'll keep your thoughts in mind as we move forward.
Any other questions? Motions are made and seconded. Recommend the budget for the fiscal year 2017 operating planning budget. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, ayes have it. That is meeting of the MBI Board